first wave of alien invaders merely watched. That is not to say that they had no effect. Their arrival on December 12, 2019 caused the global temperature to drop by an aggregate of 0.45 degrees Celsius. And that was just a side effect of the partial blotting out of the sun as their massive superstructure surrounded the planet, an artificial construct on a scale we had never seen that absolutely beggared belief. It cast its shadow on every continent, covering dozens of square kilometers in patches of irregular angled shadow, as if some kind of bird cage encircled the Earth. Over the next few weeks, the television talking heads, media, and even official statements were rife with speculation about the nature of the structure or the possible motives of these extraterrestrial aliens, whatever intelligence sent it. The leaders of China, Russia, and the United States gave well-aligned stump speeches urging calm, suggesting that there was slow but well-meaning progress being made by their diplomats. This was undermined when Israeli intelligence and then the European Union separately revealed that in reality, the aliens were not responding to any signal at all, and there was no progress to be spoken of. Then came the radiation. On January 18, 2020, entire countries all across the planet were bathed in a wide spectrum of powerful X-ray, ultraviolet, and infrared radiation. Crops withered and died, while exposed populations suffered widespread acute radiation poisoning. Several NATO member states urged immediate military response, but an open letter co-signed by many prominent scientists reached a different conclusion as to their possible motives. They argued that the radiation seemed like an attempt to scan the flora and fauna of the Earth on a titanic scale. The deaths were only a side effect, like that child who, getting a microscope, pulls up to magnifying glass, sorry. That child getting a magnifying glass aims at an ant, but in doing so burns the creature as well. In an accompanying video, which went viral among the polarizing debate, the coalition of scientists urged calm and further attempts at dialogue. Following the video, for 10 days, suborbital unmanned drones were deployed by the US Air Force to observe the structure up close. And after finding no openings, a rocket-launched diamond-tip mining drill was fast-tracked by NASA in the hope of cutting through the hull of the structure. The launch was successful, but mere seconds after the drilling began, the drone was vaporized by a high-energy emission somewhere deep within the structure. At this first sign of violence, leaked to the public by an unknown source, the hawkish advisors of the United States persuaded the president to launch ballistic missiles. As a measure of compromise, they were first used in a sort of shot across the bow manner, a warning to whomever. The United States announced a deadline of 1 week for some kind of compromise or communication, broadcasting globally and outward into space across every media channel and transmission spectrum, even encoding some of the broadcasts in binary or hexadecimal and other ways concocted by linguists to try and find some kind of mutually intelligible way to communicate at all. When the aliens did not respond, a limited, direct, non-nuclear surface-to-suborbit strike was launched. The cruise missiles, surprising many, had an effect. The surface of the structures were, after all, not impervious to explosive payloads, it seemed. Less than an hour after the missiles were fired, the 3 bases from which they had been launched were annihilated by 15-meter-wide tungsten slugs fired at incredible velocity from railguns that emerged from the structure and withdrew just as quickly. The planned second phase of the attack was canceled, and the damage to the structure seemed to be repairing itself already. Over the next few weeks, more alien vessels arrived, large oblong ships accompanied by even larger giant cubes with seeming perfectly reflective surfaces. From the cubes emerged what could best be understood as construction and landscaping equipment scaled up 1,000-fold. Enormous scoopers dug into the rainforests. Vacuuming devices descended to drain the oceans and the atmosphere from parts across the planet. Any human settlements in the way were destroyed with complete indifference. In many cases, entire cities were destroyed as the earth was drilled into by 100-meter-wide drill bits, crushing skyscrapers in order to extract whatever lay beneath. Simultaneously, there were reports of mass abductions, seemingly with no correlation to nationality, rank, occupation, or anything else. They took presidents, paupers, second-grade school teachers alike. The only sensible conclusion that scientists could reach was that they were trying to perhaps sample us. They were selecting for that non-uniformity. Genetic traits, diseases, genders, all ages were accounted for. We're being sampled as if the extraterrestrials were gathering a full set of human types. When the CEO of Exxon and the President of India were taken on the same day, the United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting that swiftly led to the authorization of the largest coordinated military effort in human history. The attack combined conventional and nuclear armaments this time from almost every coalition member state. They took aim at the structure's joints where lines intersected and appeared counterintuitively thinner than the rest. And it was reasoned perhaps they might be weaker. A few nations declined, urging restraint. The global panic led to an overwhelming support for drastic action. Concerns were raised about the damaged structure crashing to Earth, but the alternative was to do nothing, and public opinion was turning, sometimes violently, on anyone advocating a wait-and-see approach. Humanity had come to see itself as a cornered rat, and lashing out at this assailant seemed to be only the natural action. To our credit, we actually caused damage, and as we learned far later, even a significant number of casualties to the aliens. Just over 100,000 were killed, in fact. Their response was swift and completely disproportionate. For every alien that died, exactly 10,000 humans were coldly eradicated. Their corpses were taken to depopulated areas that were already being used for resource extraction. The end of humanity seemed imminent. Yet it was at this juncture that several areas across the globe ceased to be assailed by the aliens. Large walls were erected around these areas, walls hundreds of kilometers long and hundreds of meters tall, all built within days by microscopic self-replicating nanomachinery. Swarms of alien drones began to police the skies, but to the shock of the surviving humans, the only reported attacks by the drones were against the aliens themselves. Perhaps there were different factions or different types of aliens. No resource extraction occurred within the walled zones, and the abductions were infrequent, quiet, and always at night. For the first time, people began to be returned from the abductions, and word spread about raids by the machines on the other aliens. Confusion reigned, but a theory gained some traction that likened what was being witnessed to a sort of anti-poaching effort, as if the cordoned off areas of the planets were now nature reserves, where one group of extraterrestrials had intervened to save humans from extinction by reckless invasion and exploitation. If so, the parks were created with arbitrary lines, paying no heed to cultural, political, religious, or national borders. Some walled areas that struggled to produce sufficient food had drones distribute rations, blocks of this nutritional biomass, which tasted terrible, but technically sated the energy requirements of humans. The alien reserve theory became more accepted. Years later, the Earth's skies still teemed with vessels, now all manner of design. Some seemed to defy conventional physics entirely, at least what physics knowledge we had retained. Gigantic holograms were cast into the sky, colorful displays of light and sound that were incomprehensible to us. In one memorable case, hundreds of spacecraft arranged themselves above a reserve that encompassed what was once northern Italy after the walls had begun to be demolished. It seemed almost like a picket line or a protest. Within a few decades, the human race had been reduced to less than 1/1000th of its original population. Despite the xenocidal scale of the alien actions, other animals suffered at worse or on par with humans, and those that were on the verge of extinction were preserved in the same way. Human life found a sort of stasis in captivity, which lasted for a while. That is until, without warning, the breeding program began. Humans were abducted, held in isolated glass cages, and chemically coerced into procreation. Swarms of alien tourists would visit and stare. The cages were developed into an odd mockery of the Earth that once was. Tiny cities filled with hollow skyscrapers, empty restaurants and holographic simulations at the edge of the enclaves. Reproductions of how the horizon and the skies had once looked before they had come. There were no divergent opinions now, not like pre-attack Earth. We were cattle, we were fodder, we were spectacle, and everyone seemed to know it. The aliens in their various fashions had settled into a sustainable exploitation and breeding system. It wasn't difficult to understand. It was a bit of a dark mirror into our own history as the dominant species on Earth. In the end, it seemed that the greatest resource that had been found when they had come here on Earth was us, and the alien creatures were not squeamish about their venture. Perhaps resources exist to be exploited, an easier pill to swallow when you're the exploiter. Eventually, the forced breeding returned human population to about 1/500th of what it had been. There was still poaching and abduction occasionally. Children remained the most abducted, but also returned more frequently. We eventually figured out that it was the bone marrow of the children that was the primary thing generating value on the industrial farm, zoo, research facility, tourist trap, or whatever Earth had become. More than a few of us recall that we had been on a path to self-destruction anyways, that in some way we had been saved and preserved, that the extraterrestrials had been a blessing, or maybe even a salvation from ourselves. It doesn't seem an entirely crazy thought. Thank you.